Alrighty, happy Thursday, everyone. I am Minty Bets here with Mr. Teddy Covers. This week, Teddy will give us some tips for betting on college football. And in the spirit of college football, I'm dressed like a linebacker. This will most likely be a two-part series, as there is a lot of information to get through because we know that Teddy is very thorough, which is good. So, Teddy, tell us how betting college football is different from betting NFL and why we should know the difference in betting.
So, Minty, how are you today?
I'm okay, thank you. How are you?
I'm just waiting for a date. You know, at this stage, you're waiting for a date. You're like, give me games scheduled for X day and I'll be happy. And that's why college football in the NFL right now, we have games that have dates on them so we can talk about them. I'm hoping we get that in baseball or basketball in the not too distant future. So I'm doing all right, Minty. But you nailed it. You know, in the normal flow, and by normal, I mean, I don't mean normal like it's normal, but the majority of bettors start betting the NFL and then later on move to college. Mm-hmm. It's just how the flow works. I did it. You did it. Many bettors tend to work in that direction because the NFL, you're more familiar with all the teams, et cetera, et cetera. You feel like you know who's good and bad a little bit more than college football. That said, if you put the time in, college can and should be more profitable in the NFL. And what we're going to do today is talk about why. What I start with a top 10 list, then I ended up with top 12, and I think I added 13. So We'll see how much we get through today. We'll see if this is a two-parter. But certainly, the goal for today is talk about your basic strategies for beating college football and why college football is a beatable sport in a way that other sports like the NFL can be a little bit more difficult.
Yes, a little trickier. All right, and give us tip number 1 for betting college football, Teddy.
So it's real simple. We talk about the efficiency of the betting market.
Okay.
In college football, the markets aren't as efficient. They're not as efficient day one. They're not as efficient a month in. They're not as efficient at the end of the season. They take longer to catch up to current realities. We talk about the betting markets in college football compared to the NFL, compared to the NBA, et cetera, et cetera. Anywhere we have a smaller group of teams. Because when we talk about 130 teams on the main board in college football, not even talk about the added board or the extra board or any of that stuff. It's 130 teams that are lined every week.
Right.
And sure, you have your Alabamas and your Ohio States and whoever are going to get a big spotlight. But most of the teams don't. And many of the teams, you talk about your MAC squads and your Sun Belt squads and your Conference USA squads, there's no spotlight at all. But even in the major conferences, there are plenty of teams, the majority of teams, they get some coverage, but it's not NFL level coverage. So the markets aren't as efficient. And the college football season is shorter than the NFL season. There's basically 3 parts to it: non-conference, early conference, late conference, and then, of course, the one bowl game. But when you see the market start to move on a team, and they'll move from week 1 to week 2 significantly, a lot of those moves are knee-jerk, they're overreaction. It's just not as efficient a marketplace as the NFL marketplace, plain and simple. And when you talk about a marketplace that's efficient, that means the point spreads are spot on.
Right.
College football, sides and totals. We'll talk about that in a minute. Lines, much more volatile in college than they are in the NFL.
All righty. And I believe that is your number 2 tip. Lines are much more volatile in college football.
Sure. I mean, look, you'll get the most line movement from the open to close of any sport. We talk about point spreads. I mean, I guess college basketball totals are going to move more.
Right.
But when you talk about the openers, and again, the lines are opening Sunday and Monday, Sunday evening, Monday morning. And then they sit all week and the games get played, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Okay. You're going to see more line movement from open to close in college football than anything else. And we talk about those lines opening on Sunday night and Monday morning. In the NFL, this book opens 3. Guess what? That book's opening 3, and the other book's opening 3, and maybe you find someone opens 2.5. In college football, routinely, one book will open -8, one book will open -7, one book will open -10. And then the markets will decide what the right number is. And then if they decide that the -7 is the right number, sometimes that game closes -4. You know, so you catch the +10 in your pocket, you got a real good bet. So same thing with totals. The totals, they bounce around all over the place in college football. They really do. So this is one sport that when you bet matters as much as how many outs you have. One of the consistent themes with these betting 101 videos has been, if you're betting with 1 shot, bet with 2. You're betting with 2 shots, bet with 3. You're betting with 3 shots, bet with 5. You're betting with 5 shots, move to Vegas, and you have 20. You know, the more outs you have matters a ton. But in college football, being able to make bets from the openers, early in the week, midweek, late in the week, right before kickoff, you'll see dramatic differentials. And when you bet matters every bit as much as how many outs you have. So college football is a sport where if you're going to do it, not like NFL, you can wake up on Sunday morning and make your bets in theory. You know, college football, you have to be, if you want to win, you have to be betting throughout the course of the week, including betting those openers on Sunday night and Monday morning.
Interesting. Good tip. All right. Number 3, Teddy.
So we talk about, you know, in the NFL, I wrote, the note was note SOS as teams step up or down in class. SOS meaning strength of schedule. So when a team faces a couple of weaklings and they step up in class, hey, maybe they're not as good as their stats would indicate or their record would indicate. Similarly, when a team gets beat up a little bit by some quality foes and they step down in class, maybe they're better than they looked. In college football, times that by 10. You know, because the differential between the best teams and the worst teams in the NFL will range in about 2 touchdowns, maybe 17 points on a neutral field. You know, in a year where there's a really good team and a really bad team. College football, you see 50-point differences between between 2 teams. Consistently, you know, 40 points all the time, 30 points, many, you know. So when you see a team and all they've done is beat up on weaklings, and now they're going to conference play, and now we're stepping up, and we're 5-0, and we're playing Ohio State this week. Well, good luck with that. You know, from a point spread perspective, because those non-conference strength schedule and early conference strength schedule can leave teams wildly undervalued or wildly overvalued by mid-October. And again, we're talking a small sample size sport. This isn't baseball. We have all of these games. This isn't basketball. We have all these games. College football season's 12, 13 games. You know, early season results have inordinate impact on spread for the rest of the year. And I went back, it's been a while. It has to be at least 5 years ago, probably more, 6 or 7 years ago. I went back and did this study. And I went through 5 years of college football, looked at the very best, the teams that finished 75% ATS or better, and the teams that the very worst, the teams that finished 25% ATS or worse. And the best point spread teams, it was the one thing that I found doing this study that was like, yes, this is what to look for. The best point spread teams at the end of the year often struggle in a high-profile game early. Look last year. I just talked about Clemson earlier, and they, the mark that Clemson goes 13-0 against the spread, best in college football, 10-3 or 13-0 straight up in the regular season. And Clemson, they were number 1 all year. They won the national championship the year before. They still go 10-3 ATS. How'd they do that last year? Well, think about their early season results. They were tested. They played a battle against Texas A&M. Didn't cover. They had that 1-point win at North Carolina early. Didn't cover. Big, high-profile TV games, Clemson didn't dominate. Guess what happened? After that North Carolina game, the only spread the rest of the regular season they didn't cover was -48.5 against Wofford. They won by 45, and they covered the first half of the game. So when you see a team that's really good and they have a dud on national TV early, boy, those can be value teams, even if they're the highest profile teams in college football. So pay attention to that strength of schedule early on. Teams stepping up, stepping down in class, teams that have feasted on weak squads that are now going to be facing stronger squads, et cetera, et cetera. But be very aware that the markets will often overreact to that one ATS game early that'll offer you great value later on. So there is a caveat with that. And it's really, and there's no way to quantify this. Like mathematically, you're like, okay, what's the answer, A or B? And it's yes. All right, we talk about teams that face nobody early on. Now they're stepping up in class. Well, just because a team hasn't faced anybody, it doesn't mean they're not good or elite. It just means they face the teams that are on their schedule. So I'm more interested in betting on a team that's faced some tough foes that now has a weak opponent that they can maul than I am betting against a team that's been mauling weak opponents that's now stepping up just because maybe they are good.
Yeah.
Just because they haven't faced anyone doesn't mean by any strength of the imagination that
they're not
by any stretch of the imagination that they're a bad team. And last but not least, I'm going to stay with this three for a minute. We talk about, the non-conference strength of schedule and the early conference strength of schedule and Clemson last year, value over the course of the season. I talked about this in the NFL pod. It ebbs and flows. I use the 2000 Patriots, your class example, the best team ever. Only team to finish the regular season undefeated. 9-1 ATS start, 1-8 ATS finish. I brought up the Ravens last year, 1-5 ATS start, 9-1 ATS finish, win wildly overvalued to the playoff game. Look at Ohio State from last year as a clear example from this. A truly elite team. They crushed everybody for 2 months. Big money makers. You back Ohio State down the stretch. Not so much when it comes to money making. So recognize that your value over the course of the season, it just goes, it ebbs and flows. It's not the straight lines. It's always curves.
Right. Well, roller coaster. Okay. Good tip. Tip number 4, Teddy.
Well, you got to give me a second, Minty. I need a sip of water.
Why are you not drinking literally right after you finish? Just drink.
Because you said I finished, and then you said, okay, Teddy, number 4. And by the time I got the water from here up to my lips, back to me. You got to give me
motion.
I don't need long. Just give me 15, 30 seconds. You can do it.
Okay, we'll watch you drink. Wait, why are you not drinking tea? And you're just drinking water now.
Because I'm hot. It's 100.
It is hot, and you're wearing a blazer.
Yeah, exactly. I got the tea right here, but right now I don't need the caffeine. I need the fluids.
Yeah, I see. So, yes. Okay.
Thank you for watching me chug half a water.
Of course, that's what I am here for. All right, tip number 4, Teddy.
All right, so there's a much, much wider range of potential point spreads and totals. Yes. There's a much wider range of talent versus no talent. The worst NFL team has enough talent to beat the best NFL team if the best NFL team doesn't show up that day, or the best NFL team turns the ball over, or the best NFL team's not focused. Happens every year. You see the double-digit underdogs winning straight up in those types.
Yeah.
In college football, you can put Clemson against Wofford 100 times, and Clemson's going to beat them every time. Okay? Yeah. There's a much wider range of potential point spread in total. There's a much wider range of talent versus no talent. In the NFL, you don't see much over -14 when it comes to point spreads. 2 touchdowns.
Not at all.
And you basically never see anything -20. That one Patriots team, the only team I can remember having 20-point spreads on a regular basis. In college, every week you see 30-point spreads, 40-point spreads. Even in conference play, you see 30 and 40-point spreads. It's the same story with totals. In the NFL, you never see a 60. I keep waiting for the first NFL 60. Haven't seen it. Never. College football, there are games in the 30s, occasionally in the low 40s, and all the way up to the mid to upper 80s. So when you talk about value, all right, this is one of these ubiquitous concepts that every sports bettor wants to say, I see value at that number. Sometimes you see value with a 35-point favorite that should be -42. You know? It's a very different thought process regarding value. These are two offenses, explosive, big play galore, but the total's 86.5. It's a different thought process regarding where you find value with bigger sides, bigger totals than it is with the smaller numbers that you see in other sports. So that wider range of potential point spreads and totals is a valuable thing for better. The wider range of talent versus no talent is a valuable thing for better, because you say, all right, here's this 40-point dog. They cannot compete. Oh, this favorite? Oh, I saw this coach's quote. They're into it this week. They want to annihilate this team. Yeah, I'll lay 36.5 here. Or this favorite's flat as a pancake. They're not going to score 60 this week, but the total's sitting at 80, and the dog can't move. All they want to do is shorten the game. Bang, underbet. You find your quotes and your info from the local sources and process that through a different type of where's the value spectrum than you do in other sports. So certainly something to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that, like, I didn't always used to bet on college football. I was more NFL. And when I saw, like, the point spreads and the totals being so lopsided with college football, it kind of deterred me and scared me a little from betting college football right away. But that does make sense that there's more value.
Me and you both. All of us. I mean, this is not unique to us. We talk about the process for bettors. That's why I talked at the top. Most bettors start betting NFL. Sometimes the basketball bettors will start betting NBA or college, but college football tends to be the acquired taste. You don't start drinking beer and go, oh, let me get a, let me try this. Yeah, exactly. Let me try something bitter. You come around to it.
Start with a pear cider and then work your way up to a Bud Light and then just
sure, exactly. Bingo. But that's almost the way college football is. And then by the time you're drinking your Guinness, you're like, damn, this is a good beer. By the time you're betting college football, you're like, wow, I see the opportunities here. This is a sport where you can legitimately find positive expectation wagers every week of the season.
Yes, agreed. All right. Tip number 5, Teddy.
So one of the things that certainly many casual bettors figured out the last couple of years is instead of laying 42 with the team for the full game, why don't you lay 28 with them in the first half? Alabama had that run of first halves. Clemson had that run of first halves. There are plenty of opportunities for derivative bets. And the number one derivative bet, again, that many beginning bettors look to is the big favorite first half. And it's a bet I'm going to recommend. It's not, that's not that. Okay, it might be the square way to play it. Squares win in college football all the time. It's not
yes, they do.
Unusual for squares to have big Saturdays and recreational players to have big days in college football. So we talk about your standard full game point spread versus total in college football. More than any other sport, I'm inclined to lay some of those first halves with the favorites because they win.
Yeah.
And the favorites come to show in the second half. Saban's going to empty the bench, and Swinney's going to empty the bench, and that's that. But not in the first half. And you're up. And here's the other thing about first half bets: you're up 35-0. You're at your own 20, and there's a minute and a half left in the first half. You better believe you're going to use every timeout. You're going to go down the field. You're scoring a touchdown on that drive unless you screw up. You know what I mean? Whereas if the score is 35-0 and there's a minute and a half left in the game, you're taking a knee and going home. So first half bets, those derivative bets. And of course, it offers opportunities for second half bets as well. We talk about player props in college football. There's all kinds of other ways to get at your standard wager. If you don't want to lay minus 42 with Alabama, there are other ways to find derivative bets to bet on Alabama in other ways without laying that 42 points.
Absolutely. All right. And I think this might be our last tip of this part 1 series. Yeah, I think so. Tip number 6, Teddy.
We got to do 6 and 7 together.
Okay, we'll do 6 and 7 together.
Yeah, we'll do 6 and 7 together, and then we'll bail and come back next week with part 2.
Okay.
But
KK.
So In the NFL pod, I talked about it's not how good teams are. It's about how good teams are relative to their market value. We talked about teams like last year, the Rams, the Cardinals, the Dolphins, none of whom had successful seasons, all of whom were better than 60% against the spread. In college football, sure, you can find some value-laden bad teams, but there's no strategy simpler than this one. Bet on good teams. There were 22 teams last year that finished 8-4 against the spread or better, 67% for the full season. You just blindly bet them every week.
Okay.
20 of those 22 teams finished the season at 500 or better. There was a 5-7 Oregon State. There was a 4-8 Purdue that had winning point spread records against the losers. But the majority of those teams were good teams. Good teams cover point spreads. Okay. And that goes with number 7, which is a no strategy simpler, bet against bad teams. There were 29 teams that finished 4-8 or worse, 33% against the spread last year. Of those 29 teams, BYU and Marshall, there were 2 that finished with winning straight up records. So of the 22 best college football teams, 2 of them had losing straight up records. Of the 29 worst college football teams, 2 of them had winning straight up records. What does that tell you? It tells you can bet on good teams and bet against bad teams and make money with it. Look at last year. Okay, Akron wasn't. Everybody knew how bad Akron was. They knew how bad Akron was coming into the season. They knew how bad Akron was when they went 0-for in non-conference play. They knew how bad Akron was when they continued to get walloped throughout the MAC campaign. 0-12 straight up, 1-11 ATS. The one they covered was their last game of the season. The markets never caught up with how bad they were. UMass, UTEP, 1-11 straight up, 3-9 ATS. So in the NFL, you can make some money riding bad teams, riding competitive bad teams. College football, Identify the good teams, identify the bad teams, find where the markets are sleeping, and you can bet these on or against these teams again and again and again all season. Or not maybe not all season, but for half a season, Right. Eventually the markets catch up. And in the NFL, I said bet on good teams, bet against bad ones, but the worst point spread teams last year in the NFL, the Bears, the Chargers, the Browns, the Lions, the Bucks, the Redskins, the Bengals, they were all sub 500 squads. Compare that to the Chiefs, the Saints, the Bills, the Ravens, the Packers, who were all 60% plus ATS, all had winning seasons. If you want one simple strategy for college football, even the elites, even the Clemsons and the Ohio States, there's worse things you can do than betting on those teams week in, week out. And when you find a team that's on the rise, those are your real moneymakers in college football. A team that was mediocre and now they're good. A team that was mediocre and now they're bad. Those are your massive moneymakers. But you're talking about basic college football betting strategy equals betting on good teams, betting against bad teams. And of course, there's so much more. We'll talk next time about stats and spots.
Right.
We'll talk about smaller conferences and TV games. We'll talk about pacing yourself. We'll talk about TNA. There's all kinds of things still to talk about in college football, but this is certainly a decent start. And again, we're calling it Betting 101. It's probably a Betting 102, but if you have any questions, something that I didn't answer right, something that you're confused about, please send us an email. You can reach me, or send us a tweet. At Teddy_covers.
An email.
At Minty Bets. Yeah, an email. What am I talking about? I'm living in in the 1990s here. Give us a tweet. Yeah. We'll do our best to answer it on air next week when we conclude with part 2 of our college football betting tips.
Absolutely. Teddy, I have just a quick question for you. Do you think people often don't want to bet on good teams and not bet on bad teams because they're scared it's going to be too chalky or they're going to take too much of the favorites and it's just going to deter them from backing good teams and staying away from bad teams with college football? Because I know people don't like to bet on a ton of favorites. Do you think maybe that's why some people don't follow that rule or don't know that rule or tips, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, there's no rule. It's all just tips. There's certainly no rules, but I think that comes like the concept of value is different in college than it is in the NFL. And that you can legitimately find there's like legit value you can find with a 35-point favorite that should be minus 42, you know?
Right.
So your whole value equations in college football have to be recalibrated. Or, your value equations for the NFL have to be recalibrated for college football. And I think more than any other factor, that makes it a little bit difficult for people when they're still beginning because you don't get a sense of, you're not used to playing 35-point underdogs or 42-point favorites or even, 26-point favorites or whatever. I mean, you're not used to totals in the 80s or in the upper 70s or whatever it is. So we're all saying, look for value, look for value, look for value. Your value equation is very different in college football. And sometimes you can find value. Like I said, if a team's if they're going to kill them, you can lay 35. There's value in that number, in theory. So just recalibrating your own concepts of value is I guess something that you have to do you'll need to overcome before you're looking at these point spreads and with a clear with a clear understanding.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Teddy. Like you said, follow us at Teddy_covers, at Minty Bets, at Wager Talk. If you have any questions, subscribe to us on Wager Talk TV on YouTube, and we'll see you next week for part 2 of betting tips for college.